Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Demko and this is Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus. Developed by Machine Games and published by Bethesda Softworks, it is the second or third, if you count differently, installment in the new series of Wolfenstein games. And oh boy, does it deliver in exactly what Wolfenstein promises. Shooting Nazis in the face while dual-wielding machine guns and yelling obscenities at them. Nothing else you might want or desire from a Wolfenstein game, in my opinion. And if you desire that amazing shooting action, this game has that in spades, but it also has a couple of other really cool things going for it that I did not expect going into this from the get-go. But before we dive into gameplay proper, I would like to take you with me to the options menu, talk about PC performance, and talk about some of the issues that are plaguing the current PC build of this title. So going into the options menu, there's two things to note first, which is the navigation through the actual menu. If you just go into controls, you can change all these settings as you deem fit, and they'll just change and remember them on the fly. But if you go to the video options, you have a specific apply changes button, as well as a enter and select button, which also saves them. And that is kind of annoying, and it's only the video options, but it does display that this is sort of an afterthought. They really designed this game for console first and then tacked on the PC components as needed, in my opinion. And you also see that in the way the game's performance is such a wide range of very good to absolutely atrocious depending on your system and component compatibility with the game. It's really a bit of a mixed bag, and that is truly a bit of a shame. Now, talking about the controls, they are fully rebindable with the keyboard, which is always good. The game has all the things you might expect: horizontal and vertical sensitivity, the ability to change whether or not you want aim assist. This is default turned on. I would turn that off if I was you, and as well as mouse sensitivity and how you want to use sprint. Pretty straightforward, nothing really out of the ordinary. There is a controller layout if you prefer to play the game with a controller on a PC. So frankly, it's an FPS title and you're playing with a controller on a PC. What is wrong with you? That said, audio does leave a little bit to be desired. With only a music and voice volume separation sliders as well as master volume, you do miss out on background noise and SFX sound effects that you can manipulate and manage. I personally really enjoy having a higher music volume for general gameplay than I enjoy having very loud bangs and explosions and gunfire during gameplay. So I'd like to be able to change those, and the game really doesn't allow for that. The audio profiles are nice. If you do want to use them, they are available, and that's pretty good. Video options are a little bit more extensive and also quite a bit more established, with most of the things you'd expect, including a colorblind mode, a wide range of AA options, which is always really good, some availability to turn off motion blur in the overhead, etc, etc. Pretty decent, right? Well, advanced options move that into a whole different level, with everything from a field of view slider that goes all the way up to 120, though the game does mention that putting this to 120 might cause artifacting and negatively impact your gameplay experience. But I still enjoy the fact that a AAA publisher has the balls to take a little bit of a risk and give players what they want, a wider field of view, even if that might somehow mar their perfect little established world. And that deserves a little bit of credit. Other than that, most of the options you'd expect are available. The weird thing is that motion blur here is mentioned again, as well as in the overview page. So if you turn it off in the overview page, does it still get turned off even if this is on Ultra, or does it stay on? Is a little bit inconsistent in that matter, and again, that's clearly indicating that they just really didn't care or didn't take the time to polish out the last kinks and edges in the PC build on basically anything, and that is a bit of a shame. What really isn't a shame, even with all these options that are available, is the performance metrics, because if you put this to full, it creates a wonderful list of every little stat you might ever desire or want, and that is just lovely to view and lovely to behold. Obviously, Doom did this a while back, and this is basically the same system they had and from the same publisher, so that's not strange that they share a little bit of tech. But really good overall, no complaints whatsoever. This is lovely. Manipulate to your heart's content as you deem fit. Just remember to press the apply changes button in this window, otherwise you're gonna get everything ignored, unlike the other windows that instantly remember when you change it. Again, a little bit inconsistent, but overall pretty complete. Gameplay has HUD turned on or off, as well as tutorials, as well as subtitles, whether you want foreign subtitles only, no subtitles at all, or if you want all subtitles including the English language. Because the game obviously has a lot of spoken German in it because you're fighting Nazis. You can choose to just have the English be English and just hear it and then see subtitles for the German, which is really well intonated German. It doesn't have that heavily Americanized accent in it at all. I like this. It's a nice little addition, a little bit more thought put into this than they needed to, strictly speaking, and that shows some dedication, which is strange because other parts of this area really don't show dedication. Kind of annoying. Speaking about the inconsistent performance and behavior of the title, that is exactly what it is. Some people are reporting exceeding amounts of performance issues, crashes to desktop. People on stream are reporting dozens of crashes while they play the game. Other reviewers have mentioned this. I personally have not had a single issue with the title unless I was trying to stream it and then it just crashed repeatedly. So there are definitely some performance inconsistencies and some overall performance issues with the title. And if you have those issues, obviously Steam refunds are a thing. Do use that to your heart's content for this sort of thing. You could have expected this coming from Bethesda, a publisher that is notorious for delivering products that are not well optimized and not well polished. We've seen it with Dishonored 2 and we've seen it with their other titles as well. But such is the case, and if you're like me and you don't have any issues with the performance or any stability issues, well, enjoy the game for what it is because it is truly an excellent piece of gaming content. And I'll tell you more as we dive into gameplay. So diving into gameplay, before we get into the details of the gameplay and various things around the game, I would like to mention that this is a very story heavy and very story driven experience and game. And the story is a massive component to the gameplay itself. As such, I will be talking about story specific things, and that means spoilers. So if you want to avoid all possible spoilers about the game and you're just here for a recommendation on whether or not this is a great FPS shooter with a heavy story focus, then the answer is yes, go out ahead and buy the game. It is great. If you want to hear more details, watch on. Because the main component here is the story. And I'll get into the gunplay and weapon variety and level design later on. But first I want to talk about the story, character development, and everything related to it, including the writing and the sort of way the game tries to convey the story through gameplay, cutscenes, and in-world sort of pseudo cutscenes and little animated areas. Because everything combined creates a cohesion and a world in such a rapid pace with such a excellent character development that really pulls at your heartstrings every chance it gets. And it really does get a lot of chances with the way the game is built up from scratch. Even at the very start, as you're mortally wounded, lying half comatose with your gut spilling out over the floor, your pregnant wife, like heavy with twins, comes up running at you. And that is the start of the damn game. Flashbacks to your time as a childhood where your father tries to force you to kill your dog all happen within the first 10 minutes of playing the game. And that is just establishing the base characters. Every step of the way as the story progresses, main characters are introduced, expanded on, interrelationships between the various crew members on your vessel and the various NPCs and side characters available in the game develop and are exposed, including mothers, fathers, siblings, and their interplay between relationships all come to light, and all of them sort of get surrounded by this level of tragedy which this Nazi regime has enforced upon them. You're rebels, you're in their eyes terrorists, you're freedom fighters, you're trying to do whatever you can, however you can, to survive and deal a blow to these Nazis. All the meantime, the world around you really doesn't seem to care, with white supremacists running around with KKK outfits, just sort of chatting about the way things are, while at the same time, your local black kids are getting lynched because, well, they're local black kids, and that's the kind of world you now live in under Nazi-occupied America. It's a really grim, dark world that keeps shoving in your face that things aren't great. And the characters around you, the characters you interact with, not only show that side of the world, the grim and the dark and the bad and the horrifying lifestyle they are forced to live while on the run, but it also shows them trying to fight for something better, not just by killing Nazis, which the game really does, but it shows them trying to find love with one another, raise children, sort of find a little bit of happiness with pets, with games, everything related to that. And it also shows them how they sometimes slip into drug use or drinking or other things like that. And the level of detail and nuance developers have been able to put into each and every character, each and every scene, piece of content, piece of the world around you is truly fantastic. Everything here sets the stage for the gunplay, for the lovely murderous gory bits, brains flying around as you rocket explode Nazis all over the place. The stage is set with these characters in these places. The reason I say this is because the game also doesn't mind killing off characters. It doesn't really mind introducing, having a massive amount of dialogue with characters just to kill them off, to get a reaction out of you from an emotional perspective, to get those heartstrings pulled, to get you invested in trying to kill those damn Nazis more than just, it's a game, you're here to kill Nazis. It is truly a great piece of content in terms of storytelling, pacing, and character development. And it is surprising to find it in a game like Wolfenstein that is traditionally, well, about shooting Nazis in the skull with a rocket launcher while dual-wielding machine guns. And yet, here it is. It is surprising to find it, but it is lovely to have it. And truly, everything else aside, if you're playing Wolfenstein 2, first and foremost, you'll be enjoying the story from start to finish in every nuance. But more than just the main core story, the game also then builds upon the world. As I mentioned, little nooks and crannies, characters talking to one another, interpersonal relationships being explored, and not just in collectibles you can find, though the game is chock full of those, as any AAA experience cannot be without these days. You can find those everywhere, and they'll give you a paragraph of backstory, or they'll give you a little bit of information about something else happening somewhere else in the world, like a news snippet, or a piece of video, or like a little reward somebody got for their 6th year in high school trophy, something like that. But you also hear a lot of actual voice dialogue between characters while on your ship, while out in the world, that developers didn't really need to put in, because those are most likely spots while you're running around in the game that you're going to ignore. If you're running around shooting Nazis in the face, you're not really going to park your character behind a piece of crate, just crouch down and sort of look at the nice textured crate while listening to 2 Nazi officers talk about how they want to go to a concert later that evening when their shift is done. You're probably going to get out of that crate, shoot their heads off, loot their corpses, and keep on running. Yet the game has added that level of detail in every segment of the way. And that too is a lovely piece of building likable, or at least comprehensible and livable characters, not just on your side, but also on the side of the opponent, that really does pull that level of heartstrings. Now, that isn't to say there's not some amount of psychopaths and deranged murderers around you everywhere. They definitely are, but they're not just on the enemy side, and that is also an extension of the story and overall world. And that, again, is truly enjoyable to behold in a game like this. Now, enough about the story. At the end of the day, all the nice story, all the nice characters aside, what you really want to do is run around, shoot Nazis in the head. So how does the gunplay feel? And oh boy, does it feel fantastic. Wolfenstein's gunplay has always been a staple of the game, and it's always been enjoyable. It's also always been over the top and never really realistic in any real way. And even so, the developers have been able to make the guns feel very real, very heavy. If you're shooting a shotgun, it doesn't feel like it has a lot of recoil until you realize, hey, this is an auto shotgun. It's designed to shoot lower impact, high performance bullets, like shoot a dozen of them in a row. Compared to your assault rifle, it really feels like it has a much heavier kick, and that is displayed in the way the gun behaves. Not just visually, but the way it sounds as well. Obviously, the guns all feel fantastic. And while these are obviously designed based on World War II era type of guns that were used and then updated and upgraded to the fantasy style world of pseudo modern day Nazi occupied North America, they still have that authentic feel of a heavy gun. And if you're shooting the SMGs, the submachine gun rifle that you get in the beginning, it feels like it has a lot of bullet spray. It doesn't feel heavy, it feels a little bit fiddly, it doesn't feel like a very strong weapon. And that reflects in the way it sounds, that reflects the way it moves all over your screen, that reflects in the way it looks lighter, flimsier, the way your character just whips it around while holding it in one hand, even if they're shooting it. It just feels like a weaker weapon overall. And that also gets reflected in the way it impacts on your enemies. Obviously, different Nazi soldiers and different enemies have different levels of armor. Some are butt naked in terms of armor, others have light plating, again others are heavily armored assault troops that can take a pounding. And every step of the way, your different guns are going to react differently to this. Not just in the manner of saying, oh, this is a rocket launcher so it's going to do more damage, but the difference between your pistol, your submachine gun, as well as your assault rifle are night and day based on what enemy you're facing, and also based on the kind of upgrades you have for your weapons. More on that in a moment. But at the same time, you instinctively feel when you're shooting a gun whether or not it has a good feel of impact. You don't have to look at how many bullets are dinking off its armor before you get a feel whether or not you should switch weapons trying to take this enemy down. And this level of intuitive design and gunplay is not just amazing, it is truly enjoyable. While running around, I myself, not someone that really knows a lot about guns or gunplay in general, is often frustrated by games when they show you a gun and it feels and looks like a heavy assault rifle sort of thing, and then it's more of a pea shooter. In this game, the guns feel, look, and behave as the way you'd initially expect they do. So while you're moving around with your assault rifle, and if you upgrade it with a scope or armor-piercing rounds, they feel much more impactful. They feel like weapons you could throw at an enemy and expect their heads to explode as if they were overripe melons. And the same really does apply for all the other weapons. If you're shooting the submachine gun, it feels flimsier, and the impact on armor, you just see the bullets dinking off heavier armored soldiers, and they just sort of ignore it. They don't stagger back, they don't fall over on their backs trying to crawl back up, which with the assault rifle, you really notice them just staggering back as the impact of bullet hits them. The same applies for your heavy weapons. Getting a heavy laser on an enemy is not going to make him stagger back as if hit by some massive force. No, it's going to make him grow a hole in his body and keel over. It is these different levels of responsiveness visually, from audio, as well as animation, that really make and sell the gunplay overall. Obviously, the weapon and enemy variety as well as enemy AI don't hurt it in any way. Enemy AI is truly excellent, with different enemies interacting with one another, flanking, supporting each other, even providing cover fire for on occasion depending on the difficulty of the game you're playing with, and other things such as attack dogs or robots that all have their different movesets, including officers that will call for more assistance if they find that you're running around shooting things while in their hearing distance. They're going to call in more reinforcements, and you're going to have a real fight on your hands. Now, depending on difficulty, and I've played this game on easy, medium, and very hard difficulties all around, the game does tend to favor a little bit of an easier game style. So if you have a little bit of experience in terms of FPS, I strongly suggest trying something on the higher difficulty modes, because on the lower difficulties, if you know how to aim your gun at an opponent's head, especially with the mouse and keyboard, you're going to be breezing through most of the content fairly fast. But on higher difficulties, enemies with better armor show up faster, enemies have faceplates that protect their heads from headshots, so suddenly instead of having to fire one bullet in their heads, you have to fire 3 or 4. Obviously, you're getting attacked by more enemies, enemies behave faster and smarter, they'll flank you better, so depending on the higher difficulties, I strongly suggest trying those. The lower difficulties are truly for those who just want to experience the story and feel that the gunplay is sort of just there to make them feel like an interactive movie. But if you want to be challenged by the gunplay, by the enemy variety, by the enemy AI, as you're playing the single player experience, then I strongly suggest playing on a higher difficulty setting. Now that all said, higher difficulty settings also have a secondary problem, which is bullet sponginess. And this really isn't a problem if you're playing well, if you're landing those headshots, if you're attacking enemies in their weak points, if you're sort of switching weapons to focus on weapons that can deal with that specific type of enemy, then you're gonna be fine. But if you're more like me and you just want to shoot enemies in the head, or in their body, or in their ass for all that matters, and just want to see them explode, and if you're not as great at aiming, then you might find yourself just fighting enemies that can seem to take an endless amount of bullets and keep on fighting. And that really does create that yo-yo effect of having an enemy that dies in one hit because you got their weak point, because you're used to that enemy, and then a second enemy that you may not have encountered as much before the game just sort of kicks your ass because you have no idea where you aim your gun at. And this duality does create a little bit of annoyance on the higher difficulty modes. That said, that little bit of annoyance, that learning curve of knowing how to fight an enemy, is infinitely better to have than just sort of having a yawn while you breeze through dozens and dozens of Nazis. That really doesn't provide much of an enjoyable challenge in my eyes. Now, talking about that challenge, there's two parts of the game where you improve as a character as you progress through the levels. The first is obviously weapon upgrades. Throughout the levels, as you're moving, exploring, and dealing with enemies, you will find weapon upgrade kits. Now, you're not forced to upgrade these weapons, and if you want a real challenge, don't upgrade them. But they are available, and I do suggest using them at least on your first playthrough, so you get a good feel for the game. Each weapon has a couple of upgrades, and though these are linear, and you don't really get a choice in which ones you want to use for what, they do provide a very interesting variety on top of the overall weapon variety. For example, the submachine gun has an option to be a stealth gun, so you can shoot bullets at enemies without noticing or notifying the officer in charge around them, so you don't alert everything around you in the vicinity. The assault rifle has a way to upgrade to the scope, but that also changes it from a burst kind of fire to a single bullet fire, which is great if you want to kill enemies at a medium to large distance. And this applies for all the different weapons. They have a couple of different upgrades, and you can choose which ones you want to upgrade. And by the end of the game, you're going to probably have all the upgrades for all the weapons if you at least explore the levels a little bit. If you don't, you're still going to have more upgrades than you know what to deal with because you probably find 1 or 2 weapons you really enjoy using. For me, that's the assault rifle as well as the sticky bomb launcher, and I just sort of use those 70 to 80% of the time on most occasions, and that is pretty fantastic in my opinion. I upgraded those weapons and I don't really care about the rest, so I never went out of my way to find upgrade kits. I just enjoy the story and move forward. The game doesn't force you to, and because it's an FPS, your skill as a player at shooting enemies in the head really makes up a large difference in the way you have to play the game. You don't have to upgrade your weapons, you don't have to get various achievements or skill unlocks to complete the game or even complete it well, because, well, if you know how to shoot a gun, the enemies are going to keel over and die eventually with enough bullets pumped into their skulls. Now, the second part of upgrades is the personal upgrade system, and here I am really enjoying this system because it accomplishes something many upgrade systems really don't, and that is natural progression, doing the things you're already doing in the game. Allow me to explain. Most games, you get experience, you get a point, you spend that point on an upgrade. Whether this be Prey or Dishonored or something else, all games basically do that. But here with Wolfenstein, each activity you do, and you can see them popping up on the right side of my screen as I perform various skills and attacks and different moves, they sort of charge up for you to get a small upgrade. If you're shooting enemies in the head like I'm doing, you're going to upgrade that skill to get better at shooting enemies in the head. The same applies if you're going for stealth kills, you're going to get upgrades for that, or if you're just running gunning and taking out enemies with your submachine gun, or dual wielding, or taking enemies with a scope from a large distance, using various different medkits or grenades, or etc, etc. Every part of the game, as you perform actions, whether it's not taking damage, whether it's being overcharged on your health and killing enemies during that phase, a variety of different things, you're going to get upgrades, and that is going to benefit you in the gameplay. And this natural progression is truly enjoyable because what it allows for is not you min-maxing the system, which you can do obviously by doing actions you wouldn't do to get those point upgrades. But as you're playing, you don't really care about those upgrades. You don't really care about the progression of your character as it gets unlocks and boosts and whatever else it might want. What you care about is the fact you just shot Nazis in the head, and suddenly you get a pop-up saying, hey, well done for shooting all those Nazis in the head. Here, have an upgrade so you can shoot more Nazis in the head. It blends that natural progression of a character, that sort of upgrade path, with the natural flow of the gameplay as you're playing it. And that is something I don't see often enough in games, and I feel more games should look at this system and build upon it because it is really, really good. Now, combining the story with this amazing gunplay as you progress through the game does bring us to the final and third part. And that's how these two are combined. And here I do have a couple of issues with Wolfenstein. Because of the way the story relies heavily on the narrative experience, and because of the way the gunplay relies heavily upon fast-paced, adrenaline-filled combat, these two do clash on occasion. A good example of this is when you're running around a certain area and you want to hear about that talk between those two Nazi officers about a concert in the evening. Because you have to stop your running rampage to hear that, or you can't even start a running rampage if you want to hear it beforehand, because they'll be running and gunning at you otherwise, you have to adapt your gameplay just to get more of that content. And even though technically that content isn't required, it's just filler content around, because it is so well put together, I personally felt like I was missing out on pieces of the game because I was going too fast and not smelling the roses as I ran by Nazi corpses. And the same applies for the different narrative arcs in terms of cutscenes. The cutscenes on occasion can be exceedingly long. Some of them last up to 10 minutes in various different stages, and though you have some autonomy in between them, especially on the U-boat you use as a home base, several times I had a cutscene, then all I had to do was run to the other side of the U-boat, which took me a grand total of 20 to 30 seconds. Then I had another 5-minute cutscene, then I had to walk through a different area of the map after a loading screen, then I had another 5 to 7-minute cutscene, and then I had a run and gun area where I could run around, kill Nazis for 30-40 minutes. And it's this difference in pacing and this difference in the way the game tries to take control away from you, telling its narrative while you want to run around, kill Nazis, that sometimes jars with one another. I'm not sure how they could have improved that outside of making the transition faster, or adding more smaller cutscenes, or more of the scenes they have in the game that aren't actually cutscenes but do play out in front of you as characters interact with one another. But as it stands, there is some serious jarring when you are one moment shooting, gunning, enjoying the cutscene scenery, enjoying the emotional interplay between characters and the character development, and the other second you're running around shooting armored Nazis. And the way the game does switch between these is sometimes also exceedingly jarring. And while the game on occasion does switch between between these in a very natural and fluid manner, on other occasions it's a lot less impressive. Also, areas where you go from one high octane moment to the next high octane moment really don't always mesh well with areas that are all about the feel-good emotional side of you looking at your wife and trying to take care of her pregnancy and looking at yourself as your, well, guts are spilling out over the floor and talking about remembering fallen comrades, while just a couple of minutes ago you were running around shooting armored Nazis in the head. So while both of these components separately are extremely fantastic, and I can not really find a flaw in either of them, when you merge them together, the game does show a couple of flaws. They're not major, but they are definitely there. So combining all of that does create an excellent story-driven single-player FPS. Wonderful. Level design here also plays a very big part in making this an excellent type of game for that experience, because as I said earlier, your natural gameplay style, the way you prefer to play, and as you can clearly see I prefer to run around and shoot things in the head, does also contribute from the way the level design is built. Now the game really isn't built to allow you a lot of freedom or freeform movement. It's not an open world title, and neither is it something like Dishonored 2 that has various different distinct ways of performing activities or missions. The game is fairly linear in that regard. Even so, the different levels do have a certain amount of freedom for you to pick and choose the way you're going to go around. Bigger areas where you can pick and choose whether or not you just want to run and gun, whether or not you want to take your time, sneak around with ramparts and underground tunnels and sort of corners and edges and sort of sneak attack enemies, or try to walk behind them and try to get the officer before he can call reinforcements. This level of freedom is permitted within the title, but only up to an extent. On several occasions, I couldn't find a way to get to an officer without alerting at least one other enemy. There was no true way to stealth through a map in any of the maps, and the maps also weren't designed around the idea of getting everywhere to stealth. Hidden secrets are all well and good, and the game is chock full of those, even if they often don't really provide much more than a collectible here and there. But the fact of the matter is that most of these hidden areas aren't really designed around you playing in a different style other than the shoot Nazis in the head style, and that isn't always as fantastic. But the level design overall is great for what it does want you to do, which is obviously shoot Nazis in the head. Each step of the way, the game is designed around allowing multiple pathways to you for Nazis to flank and attack, allowing multiple ways for you to deal with enemies, having plenty of places where you can get ammo, health pickups, armor pickups, plenty of ways for you to replenish your different locations, and each level's style and overall cohesion is great. You never feel like you're lost in a level. You always know, oh, I'm now in control room. If I move to the left, I'll find pilots. If I move downstairs, I'll find a hangar bay. If I move up, I'll find control rooms. If I move in this direction, I'll probably find some bunks or some sleeping quarters. And the stuff you find in those quarters is also fairly logical. In a mess hall, you're gonna find food and upgrades. In a armory, you're gonna find a couple of guns and some more ammo. And while these are also spread out throughout the levels, you also find them in the logical locations you expect them to be. So on that front, the game's level design is truly good. Also from obviously a visual style, it is a truly beautiful title to behold. And while the color palette is more drab and dreary than I would have liked, it does fit extremely well with the theme overall, and the game does try to vary it up quite a bit. The difference obviously with warehouses and heavily armored enemies compared to your local town with fancy road signs and airplanes flying overhead performing an air show is staggeringly humongous, and that is good because it does create that variety. But in most of the combat zones, you do find yourself traversing through grey corridors with steel-lined panels, running around fighting Nazis in dark armor, and that does get sort of samey up to an extent. There's very little they can do about that because when you're assaulting a military base, it's gotta have to look like a military base. And if you're attacking a small town, it's going to look like a small town. But nonetheless, I would have liked to see them try something more with the visual style, just to create more color or at least more variety as you're fighting and facing opponents in these various different locales. While the overall level design and art assets are fantastic, and I never felt like they were being reused overly, or I never felt like I was retraversing the same area even though I was 5 chapters in further to the game, nonetheless, all of it had a sense of familiarity, which is good, but it also all had a sense of sameness, which is not that great. So lastly, I want to bring all of that together to the performance and stability of the title. As I mentioned earlier in the review, some people are having a lot of issues with the title, and I suggest refunding if you are one of those people. And while Bethesda said they'll bring out patches and updates to the title to prevent crashes and improve upon performance and stability, nonetheless, it's a shame that a AAA experience at $60 with obviously a season pass and all the other gimmicks you've come to expect expect from AAA experiences are around to do exactly that, be gimmicky AAA experiences. And with Bethesda especially, we've come to get used to the fact that when their games come out on PC, they're gonna run like absolute ass for the first couple of weeks. And that isn't good. Again, especially for a title that in essence costs you $60 plus $25 for the season pass plus whatever DLC they're gonna bring out outside of the season pass, but that doesn't reflect on the game in terms of gameplay. That only reflects on the business model and whether or not you should buy the game now or wait up. And the answer to that is fairly simple. If you are experiencing the performance issues I mentioned earlier with crashes and performance issues in terms of FPS dropping, then I would strongly suggest you refund the game and wait for a couple of patches. But if you're like me and you haven't had any performance issues with the title at all, then by all means sit back, relax, and enjoy blowing off Nazi heads in every possible manner imaginable, because Wolfenstein 2 is amazingly good at what it does. And what it does is tell an excellent, engaging story with likable, understandable, comprehensible characters that are established with gut-wrenching moments that truly feel emotional on every scale, and also providing some of the most enjoyable gunplay outside of Doom I have encountered in years. It is phenomenal sounding, phenomenal looking, and well, it plays just great to shoot Nazis in the head. Have I mentioned that yet? It just feels great to shoot Nazis in the head in Wolfenstein 2. You can check out Wolfenstein 2 on Steam with a link down in the description below if you are so inclined, and thank you for watching. If you like this video, press that like button down below. If you didn't like this video, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. And if you want to support GuyLogicGaming going into the future, you can check us out on Patreon. There's a link for that down in the description below. So wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.